Welcome, writers, readers, and friends to the Authors Talking Bookish podcast. I'm Donna Norman Carbone, author of All That Is Sacred.
And I'm Hope Gibbs, author of Where the Grass Grows Blue.
We're two debut writers traditionally published by a small publishing house, bringing to you all the experiences that we as authors learn the hard way, so you don't have to.
We'll give you insights from the inception of a book idea to publication and beyond. And along the way, we'll share our love of books from the writer's perspective.
Hello, friends. Welcome back. This is episode 43 of Authors Talking Bookish. And today we are super excited. We get to interview a New York Times and international best-selling author, J.D Barker, who has a new book coming out in May and an amazing giveaway that goes along with it. So we're super excited to dig in with him. I am Donna Carbone, and I am joined by Hope Gibbs. Hi, Hope.
Hello, Donna. I am so excited about interviewing this author. Amazing amount of books. He's a best-selling author. And so I think that without further ado, we just bring him on. Hello, JD. How are you?
Hello. How are you guys?
We're great.
We are thrilled to have you here. And there's so many questions that we have. And if you're okay with this, we would just love to get started by giving a little bit about your background.
Sure, absolutely. I am fully caffeinated and ready to go, so bring it on.
Well, JD is a best-selling author known for his suspense thrillers. He developed a passion for reading and storytelling inspired by classic authors like Shelley and Poe. After moving to Florida, he pursued a business degree while working in journalism, eventually launching a column on haunted places. Barker gained recognition with his debut novel, Forsaken, which was endorsed by Stephen King. With also a string of best-selling titles with collaborations with James Patterson, Barker remains an influential voice in modern fiction. He resides in New Hampshire with his wife Dana and their daughter Ember. So welcome, JD. There's so many questions that we have for you.
Well, I am ready to go. I'm looking at the wall behind Donna. I don't know if can everybody see all that? Like, that is a lot of notes. Are those notes for a book?
No, those are actually quotes from my favorite books, my favorite songs. I
Okay.
graffitied the whole wall.
That is very cool. I could see myself spending like days putting that together, and then my daughter coming in here and taking all of 3 minutes
And
to
erasing
destroy
it, yeah.
Mhm.
Fortunately, I did it when my kids were older, and if they came in and erased it, they would have some
There's repercussions.
yes, there would be repercussions for them for sure. So let's dive in and start talking about your books.
Sure.
Let's talk about the new book that's coming out, because I pulled this off your website and it's something I keep upstairs. I am in love with this cover. A haunted house to be born, somebody has to die. And it's coming out on May the 13th. Talk to us about this book that's coming out.
All right. So imagine you're 17 years old and your grandmother dies and she leaves you a house on a private island. Like, what would you do with that at 17 years old?
Oh, that's a very good question. I don't
Well,
know.
I can tell you what my characters do. They decide to turn it into a party house. All their friends, they decide they're going to hop on boats, and it's on a private island, so you can only get to it by boat. And they decide they're going to spend their last summer before heading off to college partying at this house. But they get bored with the whole partying atmosphere after a little while. And at some point, somebody raises their hand and says, "Hey, what would it take to turn this into a haunted house?" So they start exactly where you would expect. There's Ouija boards, there's scary stories, but things escalate. And as the tagline suggests, for a haunted house to be born, somebody has to die. So you know where they're going. But it's this one's all about the journey. The funnest part for me on this is the house that's on the cover is a real house. So I live on a little island off the coast of Portsmouth in New England. And I run every day after I finish up my writing. And at one point I crossed the beach. And when I'm standing out on the beach, about a quarter mile out is this tiny little island. It's only about an acre with this one house sitting on it, a white house with a red roof. And you're both authors. So like that what if gene kicked in the moment I saw it, like, what if this is going going on? What if that's going on? I see it almost every day. Sometimes there's lights on. Sometimes you see somebody walking on the beach, but you never really know what's going on out there. So that's basically what sparked the idea for the book. I wanted to create a story surrounding that house. So I came up with this idea for the haunted house side, story, but I wanted my own twist on it. We've all read the stories about a house that's already haunted. Somebody died there and this and that, and like it's always that same pattern over and over again. I didn't want to do that. I wanted to figure out what would it take to actually take what's considered a perfectly normal house and make it haunted, which is what the book is about.
That sounds like a wild ride. I actually have a question based on the summary that you gave. So is the protagonist a 17-year-old who moves into the house?
He eventually, his parents don't want him to, but yeah, he basically moves in. It starts off with just going there, nights and weekends with his friends, and then he, quickly decides he'd rather live there than with his folks.
Who do you see as the optimal audience for this?
Well, because of the way it's written, most of my audience is adult. My
Mhm.
average reader is anywhere from 20, 23, 24, all the way on up. So I think they're all going to come along for the ride. It's very similar to, if you read like Carrie by Stephen King or
Mm.
Christine, those types of books. Even though the protagonist and some of the characters are younger, it's most definitely an adult read. Young adult will like it too.
Yeah, I'm thinking about my high school students. And so I teach high school, I teach film, I teach creative writing, and this sounds like a book that they would love.
Well, that's a great. I mean, your audience is primarily writers, right? So we can go into the
Yeah.
weeds a little bit.
Mm.
So at one point when my books really started to hit, the Fourth Monkey series took off. It was a bestseller all around the world. I had a conversation with my editors, and they told me that my average reader is women 45 and over,
Yeah.
and that's fairly common. Women tend to pick
Mhm.
up a lot of these books.
Mhm.
They tell the men in their life about it. So all of a sudden the husbands and boyfriends are hearing about it, and they start to pick it up. But the women tend to be the leaders on this. But when I heard that stat, the first thing that popped into my head is, well, how do I get the rest? How
Mm.
do I get, the rest of that group? So I wrote a book called She Has a Broken Thing Where Her Heart Should Be, which is essentially a retelling of Great Expectations, but a
Mhm.
modernized version of it. So if you were to
Mhm.
imagine like Stephen King retelling Great Expectations, that's basically what we ended up with. And we marketed that towards young adult. And in
Oh,
today's world, a lot of schools actually teach it.
oh, good.
Along with, I wrote a prequel to Dracula for Bram Stoker's family called Dracul, and that's another one. And what we're finding is we can rope kids in, and it's hard for me to say kids, but I'm 54 at this point. So like I have to think of them that way. But,
Yeah.
15, 16 years old, it's tough to get them to read sometimes. But if you give them a solid vampire story, or you give them a, really solid coming of age story that they can actually get into, you can grab them as a reader and you can hook them for life, which is, I think we need more readers in this world.
Yeah, we definitely do.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to circle back around because we're talking about the Fourth Monkey. Talk to us because this was your debut novel, correct?
This was actually my second novel.
Okay.
The first one was called Forsaken, and that's the one that Stephen King read, and he let me use some of his characters from Needful Things in it, which was fantastic. That was a huge catalyst for me. That book ended up selling a lot of copies, and when I was done with my second book, which was The Fourth Monkey, I took it to my agent, and it ended up going to a bidding war with the publishing companies for a lot of reasons. They liked the story, but I already had a sales track record behind me, and to them that was very important. So all the pieces kind of aligned with that book.
Yeah.
Was that book self-published?
The first one was
Yeah.
Forsaken.
Mhm.
And then with this one, we queried. It ended up going to auction with, I think, 5 different publishers that wanted it. It got bought by HMH, which is now part of HarperCollins.
Mhm.
Oh, okay. Yeah, and I knew that I read in your bio that you started off self-publishing and then moved to traditional. What was that journey like?
I really think everybody should go that route. A lot of people that I talk to, they write a book, they query agents, they get rejection after rejection after rejection, and their first thought is, well, I'm going to go ahead and just self-publish it. Like
Mhm.
that shouldn't be what you do. Like you really need to take a step back, figure out why all these people are passing on your book,
Mhm.
isolate that problem, fix that problem, and then do something with it. Because if
Mhm.
you put the book out there with that problem in there, the reason all these people who know the industry are passing on it, that problem's not going to go away. It's going to come back to bite you. For me, I when I queried agents, I did it all wrong. Like I had Forsaken done, I had Stephen King's Blessing. I knew it was a solid story. So I just bought a list of agents, an Excel spreadsheet. I literally sent them all a form letter to whom it may concern, sent them all the exact same 3 chapters, as a PDF file. And, a lot of them just hit that delete key when that hit their email box, because agents, like if you go to their website, they've all got their particulars. They want it in a Times New Roman font. They want a Word document. They want a PDF. They want 1 chapter. They want 3 chapters. You need to do all the things. Like if you want to get in front of that agent, if you don't do exactly what they want, they just delete it. But I didn't know that at the time. So I queried all these agents. I didn't get a whole lot of a response. I decided to self-publish it. But I knew if I were going to go that route, I had to do it in a way that was basically on par with something coming out of Random House. That was my measuring stick. So I hired professionals across the board for the covers, for formatting, for editing. Ultimately, we published the hardcover, the audiobook, and the ebook all on the same day. And then the paperback 6 months later, exactly like the big guys were doing it. So I followed that particular model. With the second book, with Fourth Monkey, because it went to auction, we had a film and TV deal attached. I ended up bringing in 7 figures on that one. So it was a complete opposite of the, that spectrum. In my next couple of books, we landed with traditional publishers, but because I got a taste of being an indie, I think it kind of spoiled me for the traditional world. I really liked having all that control, being able to pick my own covers, just the fonts that are on the cover, the title of the book, like all these things are really out of your hands when you turn it into an editor at one of the big publishers. They can change anything on you. But more importantly, as I got 3 or 4 books in with the traditional guys, I started looking at the economics. And as an indie author, you bring in roughly about 70 cents on the dollar when you publish a title. When you're with the traditional publisher, you might get a nice big advance check, but you have to pay that money back, and you're paying it back at very small increments, 10, 15 cents on the dollar if you're lucky. So you've got to sell a lot more books in order to make that money back. So I started looking at all that stuff very closely, and I got a couple books in. And at one point I wrote a book called A Caller's Game. And I called my agent and I said, listen, I'm going to retain English rights for myself. I'm going to put it out through my own indie press. You can go ahead and sell all the foreign territories like you usually do, and we'll see how that shakes out. And at that point, I was in about 150 different countries, about 25, 30 different languages. So we sold the next couple of books that way. And I really liked that because it allowed me to still work as an indie. I didn't have to deal with the headaches of translations. I still had the big publishers behind me on the foreign markets. But there's certain things that you just can't do as an indie, and it doesn't matter how many books you sell. It's difficult to get into the big box stores. You can't get into Costco. You can't get into the airports. So that was like, I saw that as another problem I was trying to solve. And if you flash forward to about a year and a half ago, I had a book called Behind a Closed Door that was coming out. I sent it off to my agent. He sent it off to the publishers. And before we got a deal from the publishers, we ended up getting a film option. And once that happened, all the publishers, they were, oh, what's going on? And, that lights that particular fire. So that one was heading into auction too. And I got a phone call from a friend of mine that worked at Random House. And she said, we are about to offer on your book. And when that happens, you need to turn it down. And I asked her why. And she said, well, we're about to lay off a lot of people, and the editor who wants your book is on that list. I got a similar phone call from somebody at HarperCollins. And, about a week or 2 later, all these layoffs across the industry happened, which is a very scary thing. If you've ever had a book with a traditional publisher and you lose your editor, that book can sit there in limbo for a very long time. I mean, depending on your contract, it could be there forever. That frightened me. So I took another step back. My last real job I had, I worked in finance. I was a chief compliance officer at a brokerage firm. So I reached out to some friends of mine. I ended up getting a hold of the private equity firm that purchased Simon & Schuster. And ultimately, after a very long discussion period, I ended up creating my own imprint at Simon & Schuster. So I basically get to act as an indie author. I have my own publishing house, but my print sales and distribution is all handled by Simon & Schuster. So I get basically the best of both worlds. And that's where I am today. And I really love it. I honestly think that this is like the future of indie publishers, the indie authors that are selling really well. I think they're going to end up in a model similar to this.
Well, you take wearing many hats to new levels.
I love the business side. It's funny. I write books with James Patterson, and we have so many phone calls on the books, but we have just as many phone calls on the business and on the marketing side of things. Like, I love coming up with new ways to market books, coming up with things that nobody else is doing, just trying to keep it fresh.
Yeah, because I wanted to ask you about your collaboration. What is that like, and what is your experience, and how has that shaped your writing style? Because Donna and I are getting ready to do a collaboration as well. What kind of advice can you give everyone about if you are going to do a collaboration?
Well, I spent almost 23 years, I think, total working behind the scenes in the publishing industry as a book doctor and a ghostwriter. So I was basically a hired hand. They would hire me to come in and fix a manuscript that had been turned in, or I would write a memoir, knowing that somebody else's name was going to go on the cover. But the bulk of my publishing career was collaborating with other people. So when I sat down to write my own book, that was actually different. It felt very weird for me to be at a desk all by myself, not interacting with somebody else on that project.
Hmm.
So I've always tried to keep collaborations as part of my writing process. I wrote the prequel to Dracula. Then when James Patterson called me, I think we're 5 books in now. We're talking about the next one. It's very much, I always explain it like this. So if you're in a kitchen and you're cooking breakfast, if both of you try to cook eggs at the same time, you're going to have a problem. But if one person is making eggs and the other one's making bacon, everything goes smooth. So what you really need to do is sit down with your collaborator, figure out, your strengths, figure out your weaknesses, and then divide and conquer. If you try to do the same thing, it becomes problematic. And you have to fill that out and you figure it all out at the beginning of the writing process. Every collaboration is different. I've done books with Patterson where we've literally gone back and forth chapter by chapter. I've got other ones where he handed me a draft and I rewrote it, and vice versa. It's all over the board. But I tend to be flexible when it comes to that. I like working with other people. It takes the book in a direction that it wouldn't go in if I were, handling it as a solo project.
I was on a plane last year, and when they on the TV, you have all these different options, and one of them was to do a master class, and I did a James Patterson master class. And my big takeaway from that was that he said that he felt that the outlining process was the most creative phase of writing, where the ideas take shape and start to layer on themselves. What do you think about outlining? Do you agree with him? Do you outline?
I have to confess, Jim turned me into an outliner.
Yeah.
So like I came into this, like you can see my bookshelf behind me. Like out of all those books, there's only one book up there on craft, and it's On Writing by Stephen King.
Mhm.
That's always been my Bible when it comes to this industry. And if you read that book, he tells you that, he purposely has no clue where his stories are going. He comes up with his plot, he comes up with his characters, he drops these people into the middle of some kind of crazy scenario, and he lets the story play out. But he doesn't know where it's going. And, many of us call that discovery writing. We call it pantsing. That's how I wrote for the bulk of my early career. And when I first sat down with Patterson, we had lunch and we were talking about all this. And, he mentioned that he was a strict outliner. I told him I'd never work with an outline unless I had to. I didn't like the handcuffs or the constraints of it. And we left that lunch thinking we weren't going to be able to work together because the styles were just too different and neither of us really wanted to bend. A couple months later, he called me up. He's like, you know what? Let's try it your way. Let's try pantsing a novel. So we wrote a book called The Coast to Coast Murders, and I would write a scene. I would paint him into what I thought was some kind of crazy, impossible scenario. I'd send it over to him, and 15 minutes later, he not only got out of that scenario, but he put me into something even crazier. Sends me another 15, 20 pages back, and we went back and forth like that through the whole book. And it's honestly the twistiest book I think I've ever written because we both challenged each other. Like I tried to come up with things that James Patterson is not going to get out of this, and damn it, he got out of it. I needed something better. And we kept going, but we finished up that book. And then when we got done, he sent me another an outline. He goes, okay, we tried it your way. Let's try it my way. Here's an outline for a book called The Noise. And when we wrote that, the writing process went so smooth. Like we knew where the story was going from beginning to end. What I figured out later, I mentioned I go on a run every day. I use that time to try and figure out what I need to work on the next day. So when I was pantsing a novel, I was trying to figure out what comes next. But when I've got an outline in front of me, I use that same time to try and figure out how do I make what comes next better, because I already know what comes next. And you see that in the final product. So he converted me. As much as I wanted to convert him over to the pantser camp, he turned me into a full-on outliner.
Huh.
Love that. Well,
Yeah.
let's talk about some of these other books because you've written so many books, and I pulled these off of your website. Is there a favorite one up there that just we love all of our books, they're equally, but is there just one that holds a little place in your heart?
That's like asking a parent who their favorite kid is, right?
Oh yeah, I
For
have
me,
5 children and they do that to me all the time.
Mhm.
For me, my favorite book always tends to be the latest book because I'm doing something different. I always challenge myself. I try to write it in a way that I haven't done before. So at this moment, something I keep upstairs is my personal favorite. But I've traveled the world at this point. Visiting people who have bought my books. And to give you an example, I was just in Budapest, and it was the first time I've ever been there. I had about 1,000 people that showed up for my book signing, my talk. And after the talk, they told everybody you can only come up with 2 books. You can only sign 2 books, which basically meant the people that had more than 2 books just went back in line and came again. But we were signing books for about 3.5, 4 hours. And the one book that I saw over and over and over again was She Has a Broken Thing Where Her Heart Should Be, which is
Mm.
the retelling of Great Expectations. And on a worldwide basis, that seems to be the one that people plock down in front of me and say, this is my favorite. I love this book. I've read this book 10 times. It's 1,000 pages. It's not a short read. But that seems to be the fan favorite, followed definitely by The Fourth Monkey. That series is just, it's literally still on the bestseller list. It was last week when I looked, and it's been out for almost 10 years now.
Well, as a Dickens fan, you've sold me. I'm going to go out and buy that book right now. Read it. We like to tell people that, we want to share the things that we learned as authors the hard way. What is something that you learned the hard way, JD, that you would like to share to other authors, perhaps beginning or, even their third book in?
Wow. That's tough. I just had my 10-year anniversary as a full-time author.
Mhm.
Things have changed drastically, but to put a lot of this stuff into perspective, like I had 0 people on my mailing list 10 years ago. Now I've got 8 projects in what I call various stages of Hollywood hell, so like this world can change very quickly on you. But I've never shied away from anything, so if I'm at a conference, let's say, and I walk into an elevator and Lee Child is in that elevator with them, he's not getting off that elevator without me at least asking him for a blurb on my next book. I'm
Mhm.
not the guy who's going to stand in the corner and be quiet and watch Lee walk away and then think, well, what if, why didn't I ask? I don't want to be an old man sitting on a porch with regrets.
Yeah.
So I tend to ask the question, if I'd rather hear a no than nothing at all. And I try a lot of things. I will go outside the box. Whenever I have a new book coming out, I make a list of what I see everybody else doing to market their books. And then when I'm finished with that, I come up with some kind of unique idea that nobody is doing. And I go in that direction. Something I keep upstairs is a good example of that. I'm giving away an overnight stay on the island to one reader with 3 of their friends. Like that is creating buzz. And when you're trying to sell books, like I can buy Amazon ads, I can buy Facebook ads, I can do all the things. But the one thing that actually sells books is word of mouth. And when you
Mhm.
put readers, give them the opportunity to spend the night in a real haunted house, they talk about it.
Mm.
I'll do it. Will you do it? I won't do it. I'll do it if you do it. But like they are out there chatting about it all over social media, and that is what sells books.
Yeah, that's what we wanted to talk about was that giveaway because before you came on, Donna and I were both like, "Well, would you do that?" And it's such an
Mhm.
interesting way of promoting your book. And as authors, it's uncomfortable to say, "I wrote a book, please buy it." And but marketing is a huge component to getting readers, your book in their hands. So give us a little bit more insights about this giveaway.
Yeah, so like I mentioned at the beginning, the house itself is real. I've seen
Mhm.
it every day, literally for the last 5 or 6 years. The first day I actually went out there, the last like incarnation that it had before it basically started falling apart where they were going to tear it down. It was a Coast Guard life-saving station. So they used to launch ships off of that island onto that house in order to rescue people that were stuck at sea. But I went out there with a guy who raised enough money to restore it. And like the minute I set foot on that island, like I don't know if you've ever experienced this before, but like I wanted to leave. Like the hair on the back of my neck was standing up. Like I had this weird feeling like I was being watched. Like, I just something about it just really freaked me out. And like that I think played a big part in writing this particular book. But like the island, the fact that it's real, that it's an actual haunted house. Like there's paranormal investigators that have been through there and found stuff.
Mm.
I think from a reader standpoint, being able to stay there is huge. And I've worked closely with the guys who have restored the house. And the cool thing is like I wrote the book while they were restoring the house. So I basically had the floor plan in hand. I knew what they were doing. And then they read the book and now they're decorating the house to actually match my book. So when you walk into the house, the furniture, that's there, everything about the interior of that house matches my book, which, just kind of adds to all the fun.
It's amazing. And
Yeah.
that book is coming out on May the 13th. I'm so excited for this book. I think I might enter your giveaway. I don't know if I could do it, but I love just thinking outside the box.
Yeah. And what an amazing thing for an author to see their vision just come alive. Like
Yeah.
from the inception of when you were jogging by that house to it turning into the entire setting of your book. How amazing is that?
That to me is the funnest part of this whole process. I mean, as authors, we are literally getting paid to make shit up. I don't know if we're allowed to
Mhm.
swear on here or not, but like that's what it comes down to. So you come up with this spark of an idea and then it somehow becomes something much, much bigger than the rest of us and what you are. It takes on a life of its own. You really are giving life to something.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, unfortunately, we're going to have to wrap this up. We could sit here and talk to you all day. You have given so much information because we also this is a writing podcast, but we also we have readers who are just curious about the whole process, and this has been wonderful. And I know that people are going to want to find you on social media and on your email or your website. Could you tell us where they can find you?
Sure. The easiest place to find me is jdbarker.com. I'm on all the social media platforms at JD Barker.
JD, thank you so much for spending time with us today. We are going to have all the links and the links to the giveaway and the pre-order to your new book on our show notes for our listeners.
And our
All right.
listeners can find us at Spotify, on Apple, Amazon, YouTube, and follow us on Instagram. And you can find all those links on our website, like Donna said, at authorstalkingbookish.com. And before we leave, Donna, real quick, can you give us what is our next episode?
Yeah, our next episode is called Character Alchemy, how to create complex characters that your readers will love.
Well, again, JD, thank you so much.
Oh, thanks for having me. I really
This was a
appreciate it.
lot of fun. It was great meeting you.
Yes.
You too.
And until next time, everyone.
Thank you for joining us today. I'm Hope Gibbs.
And I'm Donna Norman Carbone. It's time for you to get to work.
We look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks with another tip from your author friends.